the House is attempting to vote on the reconciliation package today. Now, it will also have to ultimately go to the Senate and then bounce back and forth. There's a time crunch because the politicians don't want to work over the summer. Sometime between July and October, we are going to have a debt ceiling crisis, and they want to avoid that as well. On top of which, the Senate just passed a separate no tax on tips bill. Now, this is actually a legitimate bill in that it literally focuses on tips for people making under $167,000. Now, that seems a little bit on the high side in terms of like how much you're making on cash tips, but it is exclusively cash tips. I suspect there's a lot of opportunity for abuse for something like this, and we'll see. But it's going to make the job a little bit easier for the Republicans in the House because they are not going to have to necessarily include it in the reconciliation package. There are a couple of rules on reconciliation, and that involve anything in that bill, because it only requires 50% plus one in the Senate, must deal directly with the budget. So you can't throw in there, we're going to ban abortion or something to that effect. On top of which, under that is known as the Byrd Rule, on top of which the Byrd Rule also says that within a 10-year window, any deficit can't exist outside of that 10-year window. And so that's why all of these budgets are done with a 10-year horizon. The deficit, this will balloon after those 10 years, though, the deficit dramatically, somewhere around like $4 trillion. They don't seem to be terribly concerned about the deficit. And the other thing they don't seem to be concerned about is the 10 to 13 million people who will lose Medicaid health insurance because of it. Here is a clip of Alex Lawson from Social Security Works, who has been on top of this from day one, with Representative Marionette Miller Meeks, Republican from Iowa. And was she from Iowa or Indiana? Iowa. And she apparently had said she was never going to cut Medicaid for her people. And apparently now she doesn't want to talk about it.
Congresswoman, I was wondering if you would just talk to us on your way over to the conference meeting.
No.
Last time you spoke with us, you lied to our face and said that you weren't going to vote for Medicaid cuts. But then you've actually voted for the largest cuts to Medicaid in the history of the country. Do you have any comment on that? Do you have any comment on the 4 hospitals in your district that are going to close because of your vote? Representative Miller Meeks, I'm wondering if you have any comment on the health care that 67,000 people in your district are going to lose. Does it concern you that you only won by 800 votes?
She was like 2 seconds away from prying open the doors and jumping down the elevator shaft before it arrived.
Now, I just want to say, like, you know, there's a couple of things that are really important to remember here. When you have 10 to 13 million people lose their health insurance on Medicaid, there are hospitals that rely specifically on Medicaid payments to function. And there's going to be a lot of closures of those hospitals. And apparently 4 of them are going to be in that district. And apparently she won by 800 votes. This is, I mean, it's hard to know whether it's just they're so bloodthirsty for tax cuts. And again, we showed the images yesterday. Maybe we can pop this up just to remind people. Let's just do graph number, I think it's graph number 1. And let's do graph number 1, this clip number 1, rather, just this graph. Can we pop that up? Yeah. Just so that you know and are reminded, you know, like who gets into these, who gets these tax cuts? Now, this one's, I mean, 67% of the tax cuts go to the richest 20% in terms of dollars.
The job creators.
You can look at another one. I think maybe it's 3. The Center on Budget Policy Priorities that really sort of like lays it out specifically what kind of percentage each segment of the population based upon income will be getting. If you are in the first 20 percentile, the least wealthy in terms of income, you get a 0.6 tax cut. If you are in the middle 20%, you get a 1.2% tax cut. If you're in the fourth 20%, which means that we're talking 60% of the people will get a 1.8% tax cut or lower. But if you are within basically the middle 20% of the income distribution, you get a 1.8% tax cut. If you are between 80 and 90%, if you are one of the 80 to 90 percenters in this country, you get a 2.1% tax cut. But this is where it starts to, you really start to feel the punch. If you make between 90 and 99%, highest incomes in the country, you get a 3.4% tax cut. If you're in the top 1%, you get a 3.4% tax cut. That's $52,000 you save. If you make over a million, it's 3.3% change in income. So at a million, it's like $80,000, and then it just keeps going.
I mean, and this comes as the concentration of annual income at the top of the spectrum is at its highest levels since the 1920s. And we know what that led to. And Trump is actively emulating that time period. His fixation on William McKinley makes it seem like he has this kind of Gilded Age vision, and not in a good way. Like that's what he wants to drive us towards with the tariff policies as well, this protectionism, as opposed to just doing what we need to do to make our society better and more stable, which is to tax the rich and raise taxes on the rich and claw back that wealth that has gone to the top.
Now, there's one other element that has come out over the past 24 hours about this bill. Is that if the bill is not deficit neutral, in 2012, I think people will remember this, or 2011.
In 2010 is what I'm reading here on the PAYGO stuff.
The sequestration, though, I think was part of the Budget Control Act of 2011, and that I think you may be right, but and what that does is it basically says if you cannot come up with a certain amount of deficit reduction, sequestration is triggered, which essentially means we're going to cut across the board, spending cuts. And here is Representative Jim McGovern from Worcester talking to Representative Brendan Boyle, who was looking to the CBO to make an assessment as to whether or not sequestration will automatically kick in 2026 and what the implications of that sequestration would be.
And this, he asked for this analysis because the Republicans were rushing it through committee, and he only received it hours before they ended up voting in the dead of night to pass it. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things that they're doing with the CDC is they're saying, well, we won't let people know that measles is spreading horribly, and therefore people will feel like there's no measles. The Republicans are taking sort of the same tact with this bill. If we pass it without actually finding out how much this is going to cost, then it won't cost that much.
Well, they need to make the king happy. It's also what Trump's COVID policy was. Like, if we stop testing, then there's no COVID.
Keep the ship off the boat. Keep the ship off the coast. Let them not dock.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As you know, statutory pay-go, which stands for pay-as-you-go, is a law that requires tax cuts and spending increases to be offset, meaning that they do not add to the deficit. If at the end of the year, congressional legislation collectively violates pay-go, those deficit effects trigger across-the-board cuts to programs like Medicare. Does this bill trigger statutory pay-go?
Yes, and it's not me saying it. It is the Congressional Budget Office confirming it as of a couple hours ago. And look, this is really the breaking news, because when the Budget Committee kicked off this process approximately 3 months ago, there was a commitment by President Trump that there would be no Medicare cuts in this piece of legislation. And indeed, over the last several months, there's been no discussion of Medicare at all. There has been of Medicaid, but not of Medicare. Well, here we are tonight because, as you explained, because of the size of the deficits, because of the pay-go or pay-as-you-go act, that would trigger sequestration of Medicare, and it would total over $500 billion. The official figure that CBO confirms is $535 billion in cuts to Medicare.
And this bill doesn't waive statutory pay-go.
No, it does not.
So this will have a direct impact on Medicare and the federal budget, which is, again, I think a lot of people who are not following this as closely as you are probably are not aware of and will be surprised to learn about tomorrow. Chairman Hill.
By the way, thanks to Obama and Nancy Pelosi, who really pushed for pay-go legislation in 2010 and framed it as how they were the responsible party dealing with the deficit. And we have to put this, we have to push pay-go so that we look reasonable to the American public. Was that the same exact year that Democrats lost 1,000 seats across the country?
Well, to be fair, they lost those 1,000 seats over the course of the Obama two terms.
But they did get wiped out in the House.
2010, they got completely wiped out.
And so under pay-go, Jake Johnson has a really good write-up of this in Common Dreams. Automatic Medicare cuts are capped at 4%. But the CBO estimates that the Republican legislation would trigger roughly $45 billion in Medicare cuts in 2026 and a total of $490 billion in cuts to the program between 2027 and 2034. So they're being sneaky about it. They're saying that they don't want to, that they're not going to touch Medicare or Social Security, but they understand that by triggering pay-go, they can do it in a roundabout way. It's all about hiding the ball. The initial attempts to do this with Medicaid also was part of their strategy, where if they reduced the matching rate, they would trigger laws in the states that expanded Medicaid under the ACA to cut Medicaid themselves. It's just like, isn't it telling how they have to be so secretive about how they're trying to harm the American public?
All of the mechanisms that they're using, ostensibly, we're going to put worker requirements on this. They know what it does. They know what these work requirements does. And it's not just because there's a lot of people who are not working. It's because the bureaucracy, the red tape, the mechanisms to institute this end up cutting funds from Medicaid. Same with SNAP. I mean, they do it for a reason. It is to make it harder for people to access this stuff. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.